Imagine the Sooners in the playoff every year. Well, Oklahoma football is doing a pretty good job of getting to the big college football playoff each and every year the way things stand right now. But Jason and I will investigate the new playoff expansion proposal, what that could mean for Oklahoma football, the Big 12, and beyond. Welcome in, everyone, to Oklahoma Sooners. This is our 6th live edition. We always have Jason Ray here from Last Word on College Football, and we appreciate everybody being here. Jason, how you doing today?
Good, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And as we build this out, we would expect and ask everyone, I don't expect, but ask everyone that watches on a regular basis to get out there and let Oklahoma fans know that you know that we are here each and every Friday at 2:30 Eastern. It's 1:30 Central Time every Friday afternoon. And as we mentioned from time to time, schedules do need to change from time to time. So understand that we do our best to be here every Friday at 1:30 Central. Sometimes we've got to switch things up and because of scheduling concerns. So that's why it's important to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for the notifications. That way you know when we're going live. You get those notifications to know when to show up for all the Oklahoma content, but specifically these live streams with Jason. And we'll be looking to get other people involved as well. But with Jason and myself, and I thank Jason, especially because without him, this would not be going as well and successfully as it has. So, all right, Jason, let's get to some Oklahoma-centric news before we talk playoff. And certainly, of course, everybody wants to comment in the live stream concerning anything that's on your mind concerning Oklahoma, the Big 12, college football in general. Please leave it there. We're going to review the playoff and, again, what that means for Oklahoma in the Big 12. But first, a player that we discussed last week and you updated us on regarding a possible transfer here, Kevontre Bradford of LSU. What's the latest on him?
Yeah, so I guess at this point, Mark, you could kind of consider it semi-official. So there's been a little bit of rumors this morning on the social media sites that Bradford has officially committed to Oklahoma. His name is in the student database this morning, so he hasn't been officially confirmed. But you know, if you got a name in the official student database, you're pretty certain that he's there. So yeah, and this was rumored for the last couple of months, Mark, as a guy that Oklahoma was looking for, as a guy that was planning on entering the portal and just hadn't done so as of yet until the last couple of weeks. Last week he entered his name in there. There was some thoughts that Oklahoma was going after the Alabama transfer running back who has committed to Texas, but I think this is the kid that Oklahoma was looking for from a transfer perspective. So what does that mean for Oklahoma coming into this year? So he's a young kid. He'll be he played sparingly, very little. I think he had like 10 carries for 51 yards last year, so very sparingly. So I think obviously he'll be a redshirt freshman coming into this season. So from the immediate, what does that look like? You know, it would be hard pressed for someone like him to come in and be able to compete immediately with with Kennedy Brooks and with Eric Gray from a starting perspective, but he could put himself in position to provide some depth. I would certainly see him as a kid that would be in competition, at least early on in the season, for that number 3 running back spot with Marcus Major. And I think one of the more interesting things is what does this do to the rest of the running back room, specifically Mikey Henderson. So I think, obviously Henderson is a guy that kind of played more of the H-back, fullback kind of position for Oklahoma last year, and was really kind of dynamic in the touches that he got last year. And through the spring, he'd moved to move back to the kind of the running back position. So it'll be interesting to see if Oklahoma doesn't go after a fullback H-back type. Wouldn't be at all surprised to see this move kind of push him back to that position of need for Oklahoma, because Oklahoma has Jeremiah Hall in that position. They have Braden Willis in that position. All three of those kind of, along with Austin Stogner, kind of go back and forth between the fullback and the H-back and the tight end position. So you could see some mix and matching going on there. But from a depth perspective, wouldn't be at all surprised to see Mikey Henderson move back over there. Really, just like for no other reason. I'm not sure exactly how many carries he would get or how many touches that he would get at that running back position for Oklahoma this year. But I think from a long-term perspective, Eric Gray's a guy that, if he has a good year, certainly could put himself in position to be drafted. Maybe the same thing for Kennedy Brooks if there's a true, kind of 1A, 1B, the lion's share of the carries shared between the both of them. So from a depth perspective coming into the future, it could be a guy that could be the running back of the future for Oklahoma.
Thank you, everyone, for commenting in the live chat. We're starting to collect a pretty good crowd here. Lewis, thank you in particular for wishing my mom the best. Thank you so much for your concern. I appreciate that. Again, we're talking Oklahoma football here for the next 45 minutes to an hour, something in that range, with Jason Ray, last word on college football. So Jason has been kind enough to devote his time for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and we decided about 6 weeks ago to go live with this each and every Friday, and we appreciate everybody being here because it's been a nice success for the channel and one of the mainstays, we hope, going forward. All right, we're going to talk college football playoff here in just a second. I want to remind everyone that, of course, Oklahoma will be in the thick of it for the rest of the month regarding recruiting. Have a huge recruiting weekend coming up starting next Friday. Right. That would be June 18th, and certainly we'll be all over it. So please join us next week in particular. Leave your comments and questions as we move along today. All right, Jason, of course, it was announced by the College Football Playoff Committee several months ago that they had developed and assigned a subcommittee to look into the playoff, kind of review the 7 years, how it's gone, what different models could look like going forward, what are the successes, what are the shortcomings, and just review it and go forward with what could be in the best interest of college football, the fans, the players, everybody involved going forward. Now, the committee announced just in the last 24 hours or so what the proposal, after looking at what was reported as 63 proposals at one point, the proposal that they've really locked in on as being the one that they would go forward with, probably starting not as any earlier than 2023, so it would not affect the next two college football seasons. And so we'll lay it out here for everyone before we get Jason's thoughts. Would be a 12-team playoff. The top 6 ranked conference champions would have automatic bids to the playoff. So don't get that confused. That's not necessarily the Power Fives plus a group of 5. But believe me, if you go through the years, that's pretty much what it would turn out to be. Right? But it's not automatic that it would be all the Power Fives. But the top 6 the top 6 conference champions automatic bids, 12 teams total. So that would be 6 conference champions, 6 at-large teams that would come through the rankings as well. The top 4 teams receive a bye. That's how the math would need to work out in a 12-team playoff. And we'll continue to go through the specifics of it. But Jason, your initial response to the announcement and this format?
So I think I'm probably going to be in the minority based on a lot of comments and posts and thoughts that I've seen from a mainstream media perspective, and just maybe even kind of looking on social media on some of the media outlets. I actually really like it. I like the 12 teams. I was a little surprised the recommendation wasn't an 8 team. I thought maybe they would go 8 versus 12. But I think when you think of the 12 team playoff, Mark, I think it checks so many boxes that I think that we need from an expansion perspective. You touched on it in terms of the top 6 conference champions essentially getting automatic selection into the college football playoff. So you're exactly right. It's probably most years it's going to be the 5 Power Fives plus a group of 5. I mean, there might be a year, in there every once in a while, every great once in a while, where there might be, 2 group of 5 conferences that have a higher ranked team than maybe like a Pac-12 or something like that. Then and that it may happen. I'm thinking of a few years ago, maybe a TCU and a Boise State both get in, as opposed to maybe an Oregon or a Pac-12 champion. So I think from that perspective, it certainly checks that box. It gives the opportunity for some of the group of 5 teams to make it where it doesn't necessarily it doesn't devalue the regular season. It doesn't. And the thing that I love about it, maybe more than anything, you touched on it, the top 4 conference champions get that first round bye. So I think that it values the conference championship games even more, which I really love. And then, the argument that I've always heard, and then me and you both, we've talked through this, is that it devalues the regular season. And I think it does nothing but the opposite. I think it values the regular season, where you have teams that maybe have 2 or 3 losses coming into November. Essentially, they're playing for a spot in the bowl game, or maybe they're a Florida, or maybe they're a big blue blood, a big team that had really high expectations coming into the year, and maybe they've stumbled a little bit and they don't have a clear path. This gives them a much clearer path, and it gives them the opportunity to make some of these games in November matter even more than maybe they would have previously. So, I mean, there's a couple of areas that we can get into that might be of concern, just the mechanics of a 12-team playoff. But I think overall, I like the model, and I think it was Tony Kornheiser that I saw on ESPN the other day or yesterday had talked about the things that he didn't necessarily like about it, but at the end he says, it's going to happen. There's no doubt in my mind it's going to happen, because there's going to be networks like this network that is going to throw obscene amount of money at this idea. Just the salivation that I think these networks will have on a 12-team playoff, which equates to, I'm not sure how many games. I think that equates to 11 games in a playoff situation versus what we have today, which is 3. So. Yeah, I think there's some concerns that I have, maybe from the student athlete perspective, and maybe some of our fans perspective, and we can kind of get into that. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm, whether it's 8 or whether it's 12, I'm all for the expansion at this level.
So what I like about it is the number of teams, because of the number of teams that get afforded a possibility and an opportunity to win a national championship.
Yep.
So unfortunately, the number of teams, though, is not functional to eliminate byes. So if you follow me, I like the number, like let's say the number was 11, which doesn't make any sense, but that it would afford more teams the opportunity to win a national championship, and I like that. But I don't like the number because of the byes.
Yeah.
So what you just said about the byes, I think, is a great point, though. And I got to admit, I had not really looked at it that way in terms of giving greater value to the conference championship game. So that was kind of an obvious point in seeing the basic tenets of this is, yes, if you win a conference championship, you're going to get in. Most likely, you're going to get in. And then only conference champions are receiving byes. So eliminate the possibility of a highly ranked, and we'll name the conference because it's the one that goes to everyone's mind, SEC team that loses a conference championship game and is 12-1 of still staying at number 3 in the country and getting a bye. That eliminates that. Mm-hmm. You have to win a conference to get a bye. So I love that it values it in that way. And then also there's just a obvious emphasis on the conference championship. So I love that part of it. So what I don't like are the byes. And this is why I don't like the byes, is because they can't be objectively determined like they can in the NFL.
Sure. Yeah. Well, from an objectivity perspective, I think, when they look at the top 4 ranked conference champions, I think it's, from what I read, it will go through the college football playoff rankings, just as we normally have. But yeah, from that perspective, the objectivity, is not what probably it needs to be. To your point about the NFL, it's very clear who should get the bye based on the conference and their division. But no, yeah, and I see that point, and that's honestly, to your point, Mark. That's why I thought that they might land at 8, because when you look at 8, you eliminate the first round buys, to your point, and you also eliminate the home site thing. And I'm not sure how you feel about that. I go back and forth. I know it's a common model across all other sports. I hate the idea of a team that has battled their way into getting a playoff spot and they have to go play a game in front of 80,000 fans that are against them for an opportunity to win a national championship. I've never been really in support of, in any sport, whether it's and I know you kind of have to do it, but whether it's the NBA, the NFL, the MLB, whatever it is, there's always a host, at least early on, and most of the way it's throughout the playoffs. So I think that's another area where I would have a concern as well. And then the other two things that I mentioned, just from the things that I don't necessarily love, is when you think about the amount of games that these kids are going to have to play, assuming that the model of the schedule kind of continues, and you have a 12-game regular season, then you have a conference championship game, which gets you to 13 games. If you have a team that plays in the first round, quarterfinals, semifinals, and championship game, that's 17 games. That's a lot. I mean, I think that's a lot for some of these kids. It's not obviously dissimilar to the amount of games that they would play at the NFL level. Should those whoever could make it to the next level, obviously they would play more at the next level. So you could think on one side that maybe it prepares them a little bit more for what that is, but at the NFL, they're not having to worry about all of the responsibilities that they have as a student. And the other thing, which is interesting, Tony Siracusa from Last One on Sports actually mentioned this to me, which was interesting, and something that I didn't really think about, is from an attendance perspective. You think it's a lot. It would be a lot to ask for some of these fans to come and follow these teams to 4 consecutive playoff games, 3 consecutive playoff games if you have a bye. So those are my 2 only real concerns. And I guess from the conference perspective, like, how does Notre Dame feel about this? I know that Jack Swarbrick was actually on the committee, which is very interesting. Does this push them towards joining? If this actually happens, does this push them towards joining a conference? Is it the point where they enjoy the NBC dollars so much that they don't even care? Like, as long as they got a spot. Typically, in the BCS era, they made some concessions for Notre Dame. Will they do the same here? I don't know, but it's something to keep an eye on as these conversations happen a little more through the summer.
Well, it'll be interesting, let's say 10, 15 years down the road, when we've got a large enough sample size to see how important are these buys, because they do 2 things. Number one, the better team should have the buys. It's not random. So they're already the better teams, generally. They might miss it. 4 might be not as good as 5, but those 3 to 4 teams are going to be the best teams.
Yeah.
So they're already going to have the advantage of just flat out being better. And then secondly, now they're going to have a bye, not have to play a formidable opponent like everyone else is that first week. So I would think the buys, and I'll outline it here in a second, is just for those 2 standpoints, is going to prove over time to be a significant advantage. So I'm not crazy about buys, period. But at least in the NFL, much like the playoff system itself, it's not selected. It's just a set of criteria that selects itself. So nobody's selecting anything in professional sports.
Right.
I'll take the NFL, for example. Nobody's selecting who goes to the playoffs.
Yep.
The results on the field dictate who makes the playoffs. I'm not going to go through my playoff system, but I outlined it a few months ago. We did a live stream, and tons of people had comments, questions, and if you want to go look that up, please do on my main channel. But I built a self-selected playoff system. Nobody's selecting anything. It selects itself based on results on the field. So we don't have to have people selecting anything. Think about this scenario, Jason. This is why I don't like the buys. I just think the advantage is huge. So it's the day after the conference championship games. The announcement's being made. The 12-team playoff is 1 through 12. Here we go. Let's say we've got Alabama. They received a bye. But it was close. They were the 4 seed, let's say. And there were a number of other one-loss teams that could have been selected, but they just happened to be ranked number 4. Okay. They're going to play the winner of, it's an Oklahoma show. Let's just get people fueled up a little bit better. It's Oklahoma. Oklahoma's playing North Carolina in the first round of the playoff, and the winner plays Alabama. Okay. Obvious. The obvious advantage to the bye is you win the round. You have no risk of losing. The teams that you're going to play have a 50% shot of winning or losing.
Yep.
So that's advantage number 1. That's the obvious. You don't play. The advantage number 2 is you don't get nicked up. You don't get hurt. Your team doesn't get hurt. They don't get. The team that has to play is playing a formidable opponent that is going to beat them up to a certain extent. So even if it's just nicks and bruises and just beat up a little bit, your team's going to be a little bit more worn down. Number 3 is the significant injury that actually knocks a player out, or 2 players, or who knows, 3 players. I got to think there's an average of 1 to 2 players. I don't know what that average would be. But again, the potential of having an impact player or any starting player, any player knocked out of that game, or 2 players knocked out of that next game. Then the thing, Jason, I don't know that a lot of people are talking about or thinking about is that if you're Oklahoma and North Carolina and you're playing a first-round game, you are tunnel vision, laser focused on that opponent. And let's say we play these first-round games a couple weeks after the announcement. If you're Lincoln Riley and his coaching staff, you don't have time to prepare for Alabama.
Right.
You better be focused on North Carolina. You're going to get upset, lose the game. Same thing with Mack Brown and his staff. So you're focused on that opponent. Alabama, on the other hand, is going to have 3 weeks to split its time in preparation for North Carolina and Oklahoma. I think that's a huge advantage.
You're right. No, I mean, you're absolutely right. It is a tremendous advantage for those teams that have that first round bye. And that's, to your point, Mark, that's why I was a little bit surprised to see the 12-team model would be the overarching recommendation. And we'll see how it goes, see if it gets cut any from after I think there's a couple of meetings in June and then a couple of meetings in July, to where if they have consensus, then they're going to kind of move forward with it. So yeah, a lot of the points that you made are great. Certainly agree with those. Absolutely, it is a big advantage, for exactly in your example, for Alabama to prepare for Oklahoma or North Carolina for 3 weeks before, because everything that I've seen is said that that they don't have the timing obviously worked out yet, but they had kind of envisioned a couple of weeks after the conference championship games there would be the first round, and then the quarterfinals would be on January 1st or January 2nd. So I mean, at the very least, a team like Oklahoma and North Carolina wouldn't have a week. They'd have a couple of weeks to prepare. So that, I mean, maybe that helps a little bit more, but I think certainly to your point, it's a big advantage for those first four teams. And another thing that was, it is definitely an advantage. However, when you think of the fact that maybe an Alabama or an Ohio State are two of the ones that kind of come to mind, maybe a Clemson or even Oklahoma for that perspective, are they going to have any opportunities ever to host a playoff game? I mean, maybe very rarely would they ever. And maybe that's a balancing act, right? Does a team – the team doesn't care, I don't think. I think when you think about the programs in itself and the amount of money that would generate, the amount of excitement on at the campus level to be able to host a playoff game, what does that look like? And is there any kind of disappointment on not being able to host a playoff game? But I think it'll be very interesting to see the next few weeks and the next couple of months, kind of leading into fall camp, and when the football season actually gets started. What does this look like? Does it get sliced and diced any? I mean, it'll get changed some, right? I mean, it's not good. I mean, I can't imagine that the recommendation from this working group is going to hold without any kind of caveats or anything like that going forward. But having said that, I mean, I think for me overall, just kind of looking at the overall picture, we've talked a lot about opportunity, right? This gives some of these teams an opportunity to play for a national championship. Looking at, this is one thing that I kind of floated around our team at, last Word on College Football, was that, you have a team like UCF, you have a team like Cincinnati, you have a team like Boise State. I think there's some other teams. Northern Illinois was a team. I think Western Michigan was a team that would have had an opportunity in this format. When you're a kid, you go to that school. Maybe you're not good enough to go to an Alabama. You're not good enough to go to an Ohio State, but you have an intense desire to have the opportunity to play for a national championship. And, and I think your goals can change certainly, but as a team, how do you reconcile the thought that with 4 teams, I essentially have no opportunity to play? I mean, not that I'm in the national championship, even fight for it. I mean, I kind of equate that to, I'm going into, I take a job. I'm starting from the ground up at an entry-level position. And they come in, okay, we're willing to give you this opportunity to come in. Oh, you have no opportunity to advance, but we want you to stay in this position until you retire. How many people are going to sign up for that? That's just kind of the way I think about it from just from an opportunity perspective. And I look at it as, I think more is better. I think when you look at whether it's 6, whether it's 8, whether it's 10, whether it's 12, I think the more opportunities that we have are better. Will there be some holes in it? Certainly, there'll be some issues that need to go through. But I think having those additional teams and that additional opportunity will be really good for the sport.
When I discuss this with the viewers and I look at their comments and take their calls, I am surprised how many people are comfortable with giving that kind of power to 13 people. I don't understand that. And I'm not distrustful of their motives, their incentive, even their competency. I don't think that has anything to do with it. It's just like when we initially were given this playoff system, I didn't distrust that they would put in a honest effort and that there was a lot of intelligence and insight that would go into that and that they would do their very best. I just thought it was an impossible task to size down 130 teams, 5 power conferences, 10 total conferences into 4 spots. I just thought it was an impossible task.
Right.
And similarly here, again, using the NFL model, when the New England Patriots as a division champion earn a bye with, let's say, a 14-2 record, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are a division champ at 11-5 with no bye, that makes sense. because their schedules are aligned so much. Their schedules are like this. There might be a percentage, they're playing, when you play in the same conference as another NFL team, you're playing 10, 11, 12 of the same teams, and the other 4, 5, 6 that are dissimilar opponents, the quality of those opponents are a toss-up.
Right.
Their schedules are the difference between going 14-2 and 11-5. It's measurable against like competition. Where in these situations, the onus of this committee and the controversy will shift, I think, from who made the playoff to who got the 4 buys versus there's always going to be one team or two that's going to be like, didn't their resume line up just as well as that number 4 seed? Why didn't they get the bye? They've got the same record. They won a conference championship. They did this. They did that. Whatever it was, that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And if we go into this thing thinking that the controversy is going to be gone, then I think certainly we're all fooling ourselves. I mean, to your point and to Lewis's question here, is that there very well may be and will be a situation where you have 5 or even 6 teams that that are conference champions that have the same record, and how do you differentiate those? So the controversy is still going to be there. It's just going to be a different type of controversy that we've had in the past. But I don't think if you put 16 teams, if you put 24 teams, I mean, there's still going to be controversy. What about the 25th team? Why were they not deserving in the 24 teams? Where as an example, and I think one of the other things, and then we'll kind of talk through some of the Big 12 impacts and how that has looked in the past, was that when you look at the comment that I see repeated over and over and over and over again is 12 is too many, even 8 is too many. And so and I have a little bit of problems really kind of wrapping my mind around that concept on when you say 8 is too many, 12 is too many. When you look at the NFL, and please correct me if I'm mistaken, I think so. There's 16 teams that make the playoffs total in the NFL, right? And there's how many teams? 32. So close to 50%. Am I right? 32. I mean,
it's 12 out of 32.
12 out of 32. I'm
so
sorry.
It's 6 in each conference.
Yeah, that's right. So 12 out of 32. So you're still looking, around the 35% range in terms of teams that are making the playoffs right now. And you can feel free where we're at here on the number of FBS teams that we have. It's over 100, 115, 119,
130.
130. Okay. When you think we have 130 FBS teams and 4 make the playoffs, I mean, I think that's a little bit of an embarrassment to the sport, just in terms of the opportunity. And so when you think of 12 out of 130, I mean, you're still not even at 10%. So I mean, I think so. For those that say 12 is too many, that argument doesn't hold a lot of water with me, just in general. But I think interesting, as we talked off screen, Mark, we were kind of looking at collectively the last the 10 years. If this model would have been in place, how does it impact the Big 12 or just the country overall, and teams that would have had an opportunity to play for the national championship? So first looking the Big 12, and then we can kind of look nationally. So the Big 12, you have Iowa State, you have Baylor, you have TCU, you have Kansas State, and obviously Oklahoma that would have had an opportunity. I think if I looked correctly, I think Baylor and Kansas State and TCU would have made the playoffs in 3 seasons. Oklahoma, obviously, I mean, there's no real discussion. I think there might have been a season. There's a season or 2 where they didn't make the playoffs, or they would have. But then you even think about all of those teams having the opportunity. And I think one of the things that's very interesting is that we talk a lot about Texas, but even in this model, Texas would have never had the opportunity to make to make the playoffs. So that was something that I wasn't really even, kind of considering when I did this and looked at this, that they wouldn't make the playoffs. So interesting to see how that would, impact the Big 12 going forward, and then looking back. And then some of the teams it's just interesting to see some of the teams that would have had the opportunity to at least play, in that teams like that haven't made it. Like UCF is a team that would have made it 3 times. Boise State is a team that would have made it 3 times. If then you've got a lot of one-time opportunities for some of these teams. I think when you look at a team like Coastal Carolina, a team like Houston, Indiana, Western Michigan, Northern Illinois, some of those that are from a group of 5, and then maybe not a non-traditional power that would have had the opportunity to make the playoffs in this format.
So I went through from 2014, the first year of the playoff, through 2020, just to map it out. Of course, in that 2014 season, Big 12 fans will remember we had the big controversy concerning Ohio State, TCU, and Baylor. Who's going to get the 4th spot? Went to Ohio State. They won the national championship. So Baylor would have been the 5 seed, or TCU the 5, and the other would have been the 6 seed. But what fascinates me about this first year is that, looking back 7 years later, it seems inconceivable that teams like Kansas State and Arizona with 3 losses would have made the playoff. Georgia and Clemson with 3 losses would have missed the playoff.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that happening?
Yeah, that would have. Yeah, no, I mean, I can't imagine that happening. I mean, yes, in the format it would have, but what kind of problems would that have presented, or would it present? First of all, I don't know if it would happen, just based on how the playoff committee would rank some of these teams, but it would have been, there would have been an uproar if something like that would have happened. Absolutely.
You wonder when you look at something like this. So I'm looking at 2014. Arizona at number 10, 10-3. Kansas State at number 11, 9-3, make the playoff. And again, this is inconceivable in 2021 to think Georgia and Clemson would have the same record as Arizona and Kansas State and would miss the playoff, and those 2 schools would make it. And I'm not even bringing in UCLA, Arizona State, Louisville, Wisconsin, Missouri, Georgia Tech. There was a log jam with 3 losses. We're talking 3, 4, 5, 8, 11 teams with 3 losses, and 3 made the playoffs, and the rest did not. What's interesting about that as well is that under the 2014 rankings, 3 of those teams went 10-3, Wisconsin, Missouri, and Georgia Tech, and they lost that 3rd game in the conference championship game.
Yeah.
So if they don't go to the conference championship game, they're 10-2. Do they make the playoff? Do teams get penalized for making the conference championship game and losing?
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. What does the specifically in this format, what does the commit? How do they value going to a conference championship game and lose? I mean, we know certainly how they value the winners of the conference championship game, which is it's very heavily valued from a bye perspective, and then from a sort of kind of a quasi automatic bid perspective as well. But how do they look at some of these teams that make the conference championship game and lose, to that 3rd loss? I think one of the things that would be interesting is the sport thrives on controversy, so it'll obviously still happen. But how competitive are those teams in the championship games? For me, would be something to look at and to think about.
Sure.
If I'm, in your example, if I'm Missouri and I go to that championship game and I lose by 28 or 31 points. Am I still deserving of a playoff spot or not? I mean, I don't know the answer. I mean, it's just interesting to think about how they will go about that decision making.
The next year in 2015, we would have had 4 teams reach the playoff at 10-2. Notre Dame, Florida State, North Carolina, and TCU. But 2 teams miss it at 10-2, Oklahoma State and Northwestern. 2016, you have 4 3-loss teams make it and 3 miss it. And again, I don't know if there's a distinguishing factor between Wisconsin, USC, Colorado, and Florida State making it, Oklahoma State, Louisville, and Stanford missing it. So there's going to be a breaking point at either 10-2 or 9-3.
Yeah. And
depending on whether some of those teams make the conference championship game, or some of them are going to make it, some of them aren't.
Yeah.
So it is pretty interesting to go through and see who would make and who would miss it. Again, 2018, there's another 5 teams that are either 9-3 and 10-2 and miss it, while there are 3 teams with that record that make it. It seems like you're always going to have about 8 or 9 teams that are tied, and maybe a little less than half are going to make it. The other ones aren't going to make it.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to kind of think about when you look at this model, when you think about from an adaptive perspective, when they end up making the decision, what are some of the conferences that might push back on this when you think about this? Obviously, the SEC is going to love it without a doubt, because they're going to get. I mean, every year they're going to get 3-4 teams, and you would think, right? I mean, you would think almost every, unless they have a down year, every year you're going to have your, obviously your conference champion, whoever loses that conference championship game, and probably another team like a Georgia or LSU, or that are just maybe on the outside looking in of that conference championship game. And then you got the, you got the Big 12, as we've mentioned that. Most years, you have 2 teams that are the top 10, top 12 overall. So you would think that most years they would have a couple, and maybe the Big Ten, and maybe the ACC is the one that wouldn't benefit as much from this in most years. Obviously, if you look at this year, you would kind of think that you have a outside chance, or maybe an inside chance, depending on how the season goes. But certainly North Carolina would have a really good opportunity to make the playoffs from the ACC. But I mean, other than that, it's just very intriguing just to kind of think about the intricacies of how this might look, who gets left out, who gets I guess snubbed, I guess is the right word to say, and who maybe who gets in that maybe wasn't as deserving. But last year, we had Texas A&M was a team that genuinely felt like that they should have been in, and they had an argument. You could make an argument of a team like Texas A&M getting in. So obviously in this model, then they would absolutely have gotten in, no questions asked, and they would have the opportunity to maybe settle that on the field.
I was going through here trying to make a tally of Big 12 teams versus SEC teams that would have made the playoff. And I completely agree with you that the first thought is that the SEC is going to benefit more than anyone else because they logjam the top 10. There are 4 teams in the SEC in the top 10 or 12 in the nation all the time. It's interesting, though, in 2015 and 16, that the SEC would have only had 1 team in here. Those 2 years, Alabama, and the conference was a bit down. I remember one of those years, I think it was 2016, it was the year that Oklahoma beat Auburn in the Sugar Bowl. Mm-hmm. That Auburn team was the 2 seed in the SEC. They were 8-4.
Yeah.
So there was a down year for the SEC there, but yeah, they're going to fill some slots. There's no question about that. And the Big Ten's going to do pretty well if this trend continues as well. A lot of Penn State, Michigan, Wisconsin in there behind Ohio State. And shoot, Ohio State goes from teetering on the 4-5 line. Other than this, the past 2 years, they've been solidly placed in the playoffs, but they went through a 5-year span where they were like the team of controversy every year on that 4-5 line. Well, they're just going to go to the playoffs every year if they can continue to roll along like they have, as will Oklahoma. Winning the conference will get it done.
Yeah, and I know that we've talked about this a lot. One of the things, at least from our perspective, is you'd like to see some different teams. We've talked about Oklahoma versus Iowa State. We've talked about Ohio State versus like a Wisconsin or a Penn State or whoever that might be. Clemson versus a North Carolina, and seeing some different teams. I mean, let's not confuse ourselves here. I mean, those 4 teams are going to be in it 9 times out of 10. I mean, if not 10 out of 10. When you look at a team like Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, I mean, for them to not be in the top 12 overall, and certainly it's happened before. I think Oklahoma, I think there's 3 years maybe where they wouldn't have made it. Alabama would have made it every year but one, which is, I'll have to go back and look. That's surprising to me that there was
2019. It is. This is not to cut you off here, Jason, but I think I've made this comment here, and Oklahoma fans may not enjoy this one, but in 2019, it was my opinion when I was asked, when the playoff selections were made, that Oklahoma clearly earned the 4 spot as the only conference champion other than the 3 undefeated teams, LSU, Ohio State, Clemson. But they had a better record than everybody else. They won the Big 12. They earned the 4 spot. But my opinion was that Alabama was the 4th best team in the country. But going into the postseason, before Alabama beat Michigan in a bowl game that launched them up to number 8 in the country in the final rankings, they were at number 13.
Yep, that's right.
This Utah and Baylor with 2 losses would have made it in 2019 over Alabama and Notre Dame with 2 losses. Now you talk about controversy.
Right. Well, I think it's good. It's good for the sport. I think it gets people.
It'd be great.
Yeah, but yeah, no, I agree with you. There's those seasons, which those are the most interesting seasons. I mean, to me, when you expect the unexpected, and the unexpected actually happens, what does that look like? So yeah, it's very interesting.
And that kind of goes back to our earlier point that we kind of talked around, was right now, the only rankings that matter once the final judgment comes down on that Sunday, Selection Sunday after the conference championship games, is who's the top 4.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're 6 or you're 7 or you're 9, sure, it looks better, but what's it matter? You wonder if the committee would rank some of these teams differently if it meant making the playoffs or missing the playoffs.
Oh, you definitely bet they will. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I mean, to our conversation about the conference champion loser, especially if they have 3 losses, do you value that, or do you not value it, that just getting there? So yeah, no, I think that's something that's going to happen, and you would assume. I mean, they say in that the press release that the College Football Playoff page has actually released that that they talk about that a little bit, that they're not going to make any concessions for moving teams around based on really kind of based on the matchup that they would have in the playoff or something like that. But you can bet that they would move people around based on it doesn't really matter if you're the 8th ranked team now, you're going to a New Year's Six bowl, but it certainly does matter if you're the 8th ranked team versus the the 11th ranked team, or whatever you might say, coming into this method. And I think one thing that we haven't really talked about that I really liked about the model, just in general, is just the ability to incorporate the bowl games just as they have in the past. And I think that's something that's really kind of important to everybody when you talk about that. They even talked about some of the teams being able to place them in, if they're in the playoff and the quarterfinals, place them into typical bowls that they would have normally went to. For example, you got an Ohio State, putting them in the Rose Bowl, in the for the college football playoff. And another thing that I actually really enjoyed is, traditionally me, obviously only 39 years old, so I haven't been around as long as some people, but I think one of the things that I used to really love was having all of these games, these bowl games, on January 1st. And that's kind of gone by the wayside a little bit with the college football playoff a little bit, and there's not as many. I think there was maybe 3 or 4 or 5 games this past year when there used to be 10, 11 games on New Year's Day. And I saw that was something, that was a comment that one of the athletic directors or somebody that was working through this process said, college football really wants to take back New Year's Day. So I think that's something that's really obviously important, and I think good to see that you have certainly more meaningful games and more bowl games. I do remember hearing them say that there might be some elimination of some bowl games, and which you would expect that to happen with increased number of teams coming into the playoff bowl game situation. But that's another thing that's interesting. From a selectivity perspective, when you look at let's just say Ohio State's the 4th seed and they have a first round bye, obviously, and they're playing the 5 to 12, obviously that 5 to 12 game, and I don't know, let me think of a team that's, say that they're playing I don't know, somewhere on the other side. Say they play Florida. Let's just say, for example, they're playing Florida, and Ohio State traditionally is playing in that Rose Bowl. Florida has a cross-country trip to make just to watch their team play in that Rose Bowl game. So I think that will be interesting. The fact that how do they position some of these teams from that perspective, and then also they talked about giving priority to some of those higher ranked teams from that bowl affiliation perspective. So, giving an additional advantage to your point, the top 4 teams already get a bye, already get a huge advantage, and then maybe they get an additional advantage by maybe either playing in a location that they typically do from a bowl affiliation perspective, or even more so, they get to play geographically a team that's close. That's closer to them. I mean, the other scenario that you can think of hitting here from an Oklahoma perspective, Oklahoma has a first round bye, and then they play whoever in the Cotton Bowl right around the corner from Oklahoma, and they have to play, I don't know, just say Oregon. Oregon has to travel quite a bit to get there. That's an advantage for 2 weeks in a row for a team like that.
So this might be a slightly different slant on the bowl situation. So there's part of me that roots for and wants a competition on the field that determines a champion. That is the fairest, most balanced, smartest way to determine a champion. So that's what I typically push for, and that's why I come up with my different formats and how I would schedule and do all that. But there's part of me that wants to hold on to 1980 and bowl season.
Yeah,
I think this continues to kill bowl season. And this is why I say it, is if there's a bowl game that's played outside of this playoff, as there is now, it's even more magnified as being insignificant. As it stands right now, we only have 2 semifinal games and a championship game. So the attention of college football nation is on the playoffs, but still there are so many other bowl games that if you enjoy watching 2 really good teams play, you can still watch the 8th team in the country. You can still watch your Florida-Michigan matchup in the Peach Bowl between number 7 and number 11 in the country.
Yep.
But outside of this playoff system, the bowl games become even more insignificant. The bowl games inside the playoff system become more significant, to your point, but to me, they no longer are really bowl games. Because to me, the significance of the bowls is regional. Every bowl has a flavor, a feel, and environment to it. Not just the big ones like the Rose Bowl, but all of them. You know, when I was growing up, BYU kept going to the Holiday Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this, BYU would go to the Holiday Bowl and they'd play a really exciting game most of those years. And there was this vibe, environment, tradition attached to the Holiday Bowl. The Big Ten and the SEC have played in the Outback Bowl and the Citrus Bowl. Their second and third place teams, or whomever doesn't make the playoff, for like going on 30 years. And for teams that take pride, or fans that take pride in the conference and those matchups, well, that's going to be gone, because you're just going to have random teams making bowl games. And while there's going to be some care given to, let's try to funnel a matchup that looks like 20, 30, 50 years ago, how often are they going to be able to accommodate the Rose Bowl with a Big Ten Pac-12? You might as well just blow it up and say, to me, even now, when there's a college football playoff semifinal game at the Rose Bowl, to me, that's not the Rose Bowl. It's a playoff game.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's the Rose Bowl.
Right.
It's a playoff game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm completely with you. And I think, first you made the comment about will the playoff committee move some of these teams based on, maybe a matchup that they're trying to entice, or do they look at it differently because previously it really didn't matter because outside of the top four, it just doesn't really matter. Now to this, yes, I agree with your sentiment, and I'm on the same page. If it's a playoff game, it's a playoff game, and kind of the other affiliations don't really matter. However, will the committee try to do some things to keep that in place? Meaning, would you see an Ohio State as a 2 or 3 seed playing? Maybe you have Oregon and whoever playing in a first round game. Do they try to get an Ohio State Oregon matchup in the Rose Bowl? Do they try to get an SEC Big 12 matchup in the Sugar Bowl? So that's but overall, yes, I completely agree with what you're saying. It does kill the bowls certainly to a certain extent. I mean, you're going to have those New Year's Six bowls as kind of rotational that are going to host these playoff games every single year. And then you have some of the other lower tier bowls, and maybe middle tier is a better word to say, middle tier and lower tier that won't mean as much. And I think it's interesting that I know that Kirk Herbstreit talked about this several times last year, the last couple of years, how it's more of kind of a mentality of playoff or bust just in general. Like there's not a lot of the players opting out even of New Year's Six bowl games, and a lot of the players certainly opting out of some of those middle and lower tier bowl games. I think obviously this was an opportunity to. I mean, Florida's a perfect example last year against Oklahoma. How many of their players opted out? Would they opt out if they had a playoff game? No, probably not. But I think still, it does. I agree with you. It really does hurt some of those middle tier and low tier bowl games. There's going to be some teams that are 6-6 or 7-5 that are just happy just for the opportunity to go to a postseason bowl game, and their fans will be thrilled. But I mean, to your point about some of those, when you say middle tier to upper tier bowl games, like the Outback Bowl is a perfect example, as you mentioned. What kind of value does that bowl game have anymore?
Yeah, I don't know if other people think of it like this, but when I think back upon the 7 years of the college football playoff, and I can, like many people can, tell you every matchup that was played every year, to tell you the score of every game, I would really have to think about where the games were actually played. That was the Cotton Bowl, that was the Rose Bowl, that was the Sugar Bowl. To me, they're all just playoff games.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I don't remember most of the games that were played at the Rose Bowl, if I just like envision in my mind, okay, Georgia, Oklahoma, yeah, they played at the Rose Bowl, just because I envision the big plays in the game and what it looked like.
Right.
But that Michigan State and Alabama played in 2015, I think they played in the Cotton Bowl.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, last year, because of the pandemic, the Rose Bowl was played. Now you talk about being ridiculous. The Rose Bowl was played in Dallas, and it was a playoff game. So was that really the Rose Bowl? Anyway,
yeah, absolutely.
It was just called the Rose Bowl.
Right.
So anyway, yeah, that's kind of my take on that slice of it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, it's something, I think we'll have a good understanding on what the way forward is by the time we kick off the season. We may not have an idea of when it will happen, certainly, but I think we will know what the way forward is. I think so. Here's my prediction, and I think the 12 teams will probably live. I don't think there's going to be, because I think there's things that we don't like about it, the bye, and there's other things that we don't like about it. But I think overall, I mean, I would be surprised if it doesn't happen, and if it doesn't happen before the 2023 season. And sorry, I'm reading the comment here about Tulsa. So I think that'll happen. Certainly, there'll be some concessions for maybe some discussions for a team like Notre Dame, and some specifics around the bowl game, how it actually happens. I think the one thing that will probably carry some weight, and I think traditionally from just a discussion point perspective, I think the amount of games that these kids are going to be playing is something that could carry some weight and could, potentially derail it. I mean, because you think about 17 games is a lot for some of these schools. You think that a team that probably more like 16 games. I mean, if you think about it, a team that's in the conference championship game, are even if they lose, for them to actually go through to make it to the championship game is, I mean, it's unlikely. It certainly could happen, but it's probably unlikely. So you think about 16 games. Is that a deal breaker for some of these conferences and some of these athletic directors when they think about what the playoff looks like? I don't know. I mean, it's a good thought. I mean, just a kind of a discussion point to carry forward if they have. Is that too many games, or I mean, it doesn't really extend the season too much. Maybe it extends the season a week, maybe longer than it typically would. But is that a deal breaker for from a consensus perspective?
Since this is an Oklahoma show, we will note here that at least during the course of the playoff era, 2014, Oklahoma would have missed. 2015, they would have been the 4 seed as a conference champion at 11-1. 2016, they would have been the 7 seed at 10-2 as the conference champion who didn't receive the bye. 2017, they get the 2 seed as they did then at 12-1. 2018, they get the 3 seed at 12-1. 2019, the 4 seed at 12-1. And in 2020, Oklahoma would have been the 4 seed in the odd, strange year that it was in 2020, with the Pac-12 barely playing games, and Oregon winning Pac-12 at 4-2 at the time. Oklahoma would have been the 4 seed at 8-2 with the bye.
Yeah, and this is a good comment here about specifically around Notre Dame, and it was interesting to me. I thought that Notre Dame and Scorebook would be up in arms about not having the opportunity, but exactly here, listening to some of his comments, it seems like he kind of valued the opportunity to host a playoff game more than getting that first round bye, and which is interesting. It's the conversation that we had a little bit ago, right? To some of these teams, what's the value that they feel organizationally from a program perspective? How do they value? Do they want a first round bye, or do they want to host a playoff game?
To the comment made, this is a different topic, but and we'll get through we'll run through the comments just to make sure we didn't miss anything on which you guys are looking for answers to questions. But I saw a graphic on Twitter this week where somebody went back to 2008, and I think this was for Alabama propaganda sake, because 2008 was Saban's second year, and that's when he really got things rolling. So it was timed perfectly, but still, hey, they accomplished it. And they outlined, I don't know if it was the top 10 schools that produced 5 stars, and how the number of 5 stars signed, the number of 5 stars that reached the NFL in any way, shape, or form, and the number of 5 stars that were first-round draft picks. And basically, you see LSU and Ohio State and Clemson in that level, and you see them signing a bunch of 5 stars, and really no distinguishing success rate in terms of first-round picks and NFL players. But on the high end, you saw Alabama develop a very high percentage of 5 stars into NFL players and first-round picks. And then at the very low end, it was completely off the charts. Texas's failure to have 5 stars reach the NFL in any way, shape, or form was totally off the charts, in the gutter, compared to all the other teams that regularly sign 5 stars.
It's so bizarre, Mark. It's been an anomaly for years and years with Texas, and I think it's certainly near and dear to people watching here from an Oklahoma perspective, because Oklahoma gets the benefit of that, but it's and it goes so far back. Like it's almost like a 20-year epidemic at the University of Texas in terms of, they have exactly more 5 stars than, I'm not going to say more 5 stars than anyone, but they get their collective share of 5 stars when you look at some of the top recruiting classes each and every year. And I think it started with Mac Brown, years and years ago, through his tenure, and it's kind of continued, so I think when you look at an evaluation perspective, and then you kind of accompany that with player development, I mean, that's a reason why. And one of the things that years ago Barry Switzer said, that if he was at the University of Texas, he would have won 10 national championships. And obviously he was being a little bit facetious, but having said that, you can't argue the fact that from his perspective of what he was able to do with Oklahoma, that he might have been able to win 4 or 5 at Texas. So it's been one of those things. They won that one national championship, and really just a very special year in 2005, I believe it was, with Vince Young. And outside of that, they really haven't. I mean, they've made the conference championship game, I think, twice, if I remember. They lost to Colorado in 2003. I remember that. No. That wasn't 2003. 2001. They made the conference championship, because that was when Oklahoma lost in upsetting fashion to Oklahoma State at home to end the year. So Texas lost to Colorado in the Big 12 championship game that year. Other than that, they haven't even made, to my recollection, they haven't even made the conference championship game until a couple of years ago when they played Oklahoma. Certainly, there was a long period of time where they didn't make, there wasn't a championship game, but those are the only 2 years, and they didn't win them, in either year. There was a year, maybe I'm dating myself here, I know that they beat Nebraska in a conference. I think it was maybe the very first year, 98, if I'm right, 98 or.
So I'm looking at them right now. So if we just go post 2000, as you mentioned, they lost to Colorado in 01. They, of course, won in 05. That was during a strange stretch of time in the Big 12 in which you had the imbalance in the divisions. and Texas beat Colorado 70-3.
That's right.
In the 05 championship game. Then in 09, of course, the team that played in the national championship game against Alabama beat Nebraska 13-12 on that famous Colt McCoy toss out of bounds with maybe 1 second left. And then just a few years ago with Sam Ehlinger, 2018 against Oklahoma.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, they're looking, they've had some success, but there's not the consistent success that they should have had at the, at Texas over those, the last, 10, 15 years. And is Sark the guy to bring him? I don't know. I mean, it'll be interesting to see for sure.
904 Hurricane makes a point that we may see teams, it's not a probability, but it's going to happen. The teams play 3 times in a season. It's going to happen at some point.
It is. No, it's inevitable. I mean, and not just the SEC. I mean, we'll see that, Big 10, Big 12 as well. That, it's a product of having more teams, obviously, to have 12 teams, and it'll happen. It'll absolutely happen. And what does that look like from a usability perspective, from a watchability perspective? Is there a lot of people outside of the SEC or whichever conference it is, having three games in one season? What does that do? I mean, I think it's a product of what you have, but it's almost kind of, it is what it is perspective. If we want to have more teams, it's inevitable that it's going to happen from year to year.
And just to put a figure to the comment that you made at one point, just about certain teams making it just about every year, if you take out I just ran it through the Rolodex upstairs, that if you take out the interim coach year at Ohio State in 2011, Ohio State would have made this playoff, this format, every year since 2004.
Yeah, there should be no illusions for us to think that some of the big boys aren't going to make it every single year. There will be a year,
sure,
maybe here and there. I mean, it's hard to fathom a team. It's hard to fathom a Clemson. I mean, maybe they go through a bad period with, the lack of strength from a conference perspective. It's hard to fathom a year where Clemson could ever not make the playoffs in a 12-team scenario. It's hard enough to fathom, here in the immediate future that them not making it in a 4-team playoff. So, yeah, I mean, the big boys are still going to be there regardless, but it just gives more opportunity for some of the other ones that just wouldn't normally have that opportunity.
Hey, we appreciate everybody stopping by to talk what is typically Oklahoma football, but with the big news concerning the playoff, and still awaiting really the Sooners sinking their teeth into recruiting this month. We'll put that off for another week. We have one question in here concerning the Oklahoma center position and how you see that playing out.
Yeah, so I think, coming off of the spring, towards the end of the spring, kind of Andrew Raym took over that responsibility. I think for what he needs to do here in the summer, I think he needs to get a little bit bigger, specifically upper body wise. I think he needs to just get certainly more reps, more time at the position. So I think it'll be interesting, as they do kind of some 7-on-7 unofficial stuff through the summer, just getting more reps and getting more opportunities, opportunities there. I would suspect if he's not your starting center, we may have some problems on the offensive line. But I think he's the guy that probably will take over that job. I mean, I think there's the UCLA transfer is going to certainly play into that, and he's a guy that Chris Murray was a guy that Oklahoma, kind of thought who they wanted to be in that position. He struggled a little bit from the, really kind of the mental aspect of just recognizing the defenses, recognizing where the pressure's coming and things like that. And Andrew Raym was able to pick that up a little bit better and a little bit more efficiently through the tail end of the spring and certainly in the spring game itself. So I would look for Wayne to be that guy, but certainly will be a battle between him and Chris Murray through the fall camp.
Would like to let a few people know who were asking about further content and live streams today that I don't have anything else planned today concerning live streams. I am going to cover this 12-team playoff. We talked about it the other night on a call-in show, but I've really mapped out what it would have looked like over the past 7 seasons. So I'm going to produce some content concerning what a 12-team would have looked like and my thoughts about the pluses and the minuses. All right, again, circle on back next Friday. We should be here at 2:30 Eastern, 1:30 Central, but hit that bell for the notifications once you subscribe to make sure. Sometimes we got to change up the schedule, and we will really go at the Oklahoma recruiting situation as we head toward the rest of the summer and August camp. Check out the videos that we posted with Jason with Big 12 quarterback, running back, and wide receiver rankings, and also the other key points of Oklahoma football since spring practice here in the last couple months. And we will keep it rolling here on our Oklahoma channel, Voice of College Football. Catch Jason at Last Word on College Football. Is there anything in particular that you've been working on there?
Yeah, so I actually did what a 12-team playoff would look like. So we kind of centered around that this past week. So probably what we'll have something next week, kind of talking about the big barbecue weekend for recruiting weekend for Oklahoma. This is the big. They're going to have tons of visitors. There'll be tons of activity on campus. There's a couple of visitors this week. Jason Llewellyn is a 4-star. Just got his 4-star ranking as a tight end commit for the 2022 class. He's actually on campus this weekend, but the big recruiting weekend is going to be next weekend. So as we get closer, certainly it makes a little bit more sense to, because some of the kids will ebb and flow in terms of, things will happen. They're not able to make it. Some that were not expected to come may end up being able to come. So we'll have more details and kind of talk through that next week. But yeah, recruiting is heating up as the weather is.
Jason and I will certainly do something that we did during the midst of spring practice and run through all the positional units on Oklahoma's team to get you updated on how those battles look in August camp. So 904 Hurricane, be looking out for that video, but we will serve it up because our guy 904 Hurricane is a loyal viewer. So any quick thoughts on the cornerback position?
Yeah, so I think I wouldn't necessarily call this a position of concern, but I think that there's got a new infusion of talent at the quarterback position. You got Devontae Graham, who's probably going to hold down a starting spot on one of the cornerbacks. He played the last couple of games, specifically in the Cotton Bowl game for Trey Brown, who had opted out. So he'll be a guy that will certainly battle. Jaden Davis is another guy who's going to battle for a starting spot on the other side. Woody Washington is a guy who played a lot last year. I would look for Woody Washington and Devontae Graham to be those two guys. You got Latrell Touch, who played extremely well through freshman and bring factor to that conversation. So Oklahoma has Billy Bowman, who probably is more fit towards the nickel position. It'll be interesting to see what that looks like in the battle, probably with Jeremiah Hale at the nickel. So I think Oklahoma has a lot of talent at the cornerback position. It's not really a big concern for me overall looking at that, and I completely agree. A big part of the success, I think Oklahoma overall wasn't great from a pass defense perspective overall, but I think over the last 4 or 5 games they were much improved, and obviously as good of a defensive line as the center should have coming into the season, that will really help that secondary out a lot.
Okay. Appreciate everybody being here. Thank you so much for that. Lock it in here at the Voice of College Football. Regardless of your team, you can find content that we deliver each and every day. Jason, thank you so much for making this possible.
No problem. Thanks for having me on, Mark. I enjoyed it.